Well, this is the second of the Seasons of Our Lives conferences that I've attended. And I'm again impressed with Bill's courage in bringing together such a potpourri of presenters. While my vehicle is words, I don't really believe anything I say, because the nature of my work concerns the spaces between the words rather than the words themselves. For I'm dealing with an area, a realm of human existence that is basically not conceptual, and I'm faced with the predicament of trying to convey a non-conceptual realm through concept. So I must ask you at the outset to take my words with a grain of salt. If you don't like them, don't worry about them. They will pass quickly. In order to understand the stages of life and ultimately the process of dying, one has to have a context in which to understand these things. And the context usually is defined as what is the meaning of it? What am I doing here on earth? Because having an understanding of one's function or purpose makes one understand whether some process that's going on in transformation is functional or dysfunctional, whether or not it's useful or not. I mean, I think none of us are so naive at this point, certainly not in this gathering of professionals and people related in related fields. None of us are so naive as to think that only that which gives pleasure is useful. I think most of you now have found through your own experiences that there is incredible growth through suffering. That doesn't mean that we would go around programming suffering into people's lives. We don't give suffering 101, which is electrodes under. And yet, when we look back at our own lives, we see that some of the most profound changes occurred at the times of the most intense suffering. And the nature of the suffering is that we are confronting a situation which is dissonant or disparate from the model we have of how reality ought to be. And that's really what the cause of suffering is. The cause of suffering is this place in your mind that's defining how you think it ought to be. So if you think things should be a certain way and they're not, then there's a discomfort and you suffer. And a lot of what our suffering has been is not due to the actual characteristics of the situation, but to the way in which we perceive the situation. And that perception is based on our contextual understanding of who we are and what we're doing here. So that I must delve a little bit more into the philosophical underpinnings of your and my existence for us to have an appreciation of what the seasons of our lives, particular reference to dying, how to perceive them, how to understand them in a useful way. I'll paint a scenario that just give you a little example of what I went through in some of my processing. I'm in Benares, the city of dying in India. In the Hindu religion, the highest way in which you can die is to die in Benares. And when you die in Benares, your body gets burned at the burning ghat, and the bones and ashes get thrown into the Ganges River. And through that simple act, you are spiritually freed, and we'll talk a minute about what that might be about. The result of that belief system is that Benares is full of people dying. And most of these people have no money whatsoever. They are beggars at the most extreme states of survival. Many of them are lepers. They have a loincloth, man or woman, just a loincloth, and maybe a begging bowl. Many of them have advanced states of cancer. Many of them are just skin and bones. They are dragging themselves through the streets. And often on their loincloth there is a little sack which contains the money necessary for the wood for their funeral pyre. Now, if you think of yourself as a human being and think of them as a human being and empathize for a moment with their predicament, here we are in Orange County having just had a nice lunch and being in comfortable soft chairs, it's hard to imagine even identifying and realizing these are fellow human beings. But they are. They're just like us. They're just got a different place in their minds and they're in a different life moment. When I first came to Benares, when I went out in the streets, I was in a very open space, and when I looked at these people, I experienced such horror. I couldn't really handle it at all. And I went back to my hotel room, and I am somewhat embarrassed to admit, I literally climbed under the bed. I hid under the bed, just in horror of the situation. Because I walked through the streets with my American Express traveler's checks in my pocket, with my security, with my ticket back to affluent America, and I was facing these other human beings in the extreme state of need and poverty. And my pity was more than I could handle. Subsequent to that, I met my spiritual teacher, and my whole life took a different turn, and I ended up living in a temple, studying Hindu philosophy, doing deep meditation, hatha yoga, so on. And I began to understand a different context about what life and death was about. And now, about 6 or 8 months later, I found myself in Benares again. And I walked through the streets, and this time, it was an entirely different experience for me. For when I looked into the eyes of these people, I saw in them not what I expected to see in the past, not self-pity, not frustration, not humiliation, not anger, not pleading. They had a look in their eyes of fulfillment. And then I noticed something else in their eyes that I could hardly believe. They were looking at me with pity. They were pitying me. Healthy, fat, solid American me. These people in the last stages of life were pitying me. And I understood that from their belief system, they were pitying me because I was merely this wanderer wandering through life, not knowing where I was going or where I was coming from. They knew their place, they were secure in their place, they were fulfilled in what they were about to do, and they knew that I was wandering in despair and I would never find, probably not find, and they just felt sorry that I was so lost. And I had trained enough so that I could see it from their point of view, and I ended up feeling self-pity. Now, to me, that's an example of how a belief system can be so strong that it can take what could be called a sad tune and make it into a happy tune. It can change the entire meaning of a situation. In the villages in India where I live quite a bit of the time, there are many beings who make 2, 3, 4 rupees a day. That's 40, 60 cents a day. And they have one meal a day, and they live maybe under a railroad bridge, crowded together. Not optimum living conditions. But sometimes when I look at their faces, I experience a being, a quality of their being that seems more in tune or in harmony with the universe than I find in the face of somebody who is affluent, successful, everything in the West. And I understand, once I get over my arrogance, of super race arrogance, that we have a great deal to learn about the dignity of the processes of life and death. and the way of understanding them in a way to release us rather than to torment us. I have to digress briefly to just share with you my own sequence of perceptual shift a little bit so that you can appreciate the kinds of things I want to talk to you about. For I was trained as a social scientist. I was a professor. I was actually part of a junta at Harvard to protest against the soft and mushy conditions of the clinical social psychology department, social relations department. I was one of those guys in favor of harder statistics. The kind of guys you love, right? I just felt that anybody that didn't know how to do a factor analysis and a chi-square just hadn't yet awakened. And though I played that game as hard as I knew how, for all the points I knew how to collect, there was in me, despite my psychoanalysis, there was a very gnawing uneasiness that I was missing something, a malaise. And when we experience a malaise in our culture, we tend to treat that malaise as if it is our fault. And we treat it as if it's our neurosis, and it's our lack of adaptability to the existing culture, which must be right because there's so many of them. And I kept trying, like fitting a square peg into a round hole, I kept trying to readapt my being to fit into the gratification patterns that the culture was offering me. And it just wasn't working. And I started to drink more, and I started to get more extreme in my ways of seeking pleasure in order to gain the kind of fulfillment to give me a feeling of well-being. Well, then I got for some years into experimentation with psychotropic chemicals, chemicals that alter consciousness, and that changed my head around a great deal. I saw through those experiments that perhaps my malaise, my discomfort, was not just my pathology, but it was a deeper something in me attempting to awaken. And that maybe instead of treating it as some sickness that ought to be treated as a problem, I should see it as something graceful, to be honored. And maybe it would be useful to allow my life to adapt, to tune to those feelings of wrongness or rightness within myself. And I did that, and I just let my life go in the course it would naturally take, responding to an inner intuitive sense of, right, okay, that's all right. And it took me through, away from academia, it took me through psychedelic chemicals, it took me to India, it took me into yoga, and it brought me back to America, and it took me into a different kind of a perceptual view of the universe. And I found, much to my surprise, that through whatever had happened to me, had very profoundly, in the real sense of alteration, had profoundly altered my feelings about death, and as a result, my feelings about life. It had very profoundly altered the definition of who I think I am. Now, I could try to very gently take you into the space translating, but instead of doing that, I'm going to do a much more shock treatment process. I'm just going to tell you how I see the world. And many of you will say, that is absolute rot. And that's perfectly okay. It's okay in advance. You have total license to reject it. But anything less than that would be dishonest on my part. So I'm going to go for broke. We'll let the chips fall where they will. Okay? I mean, I've convinced you I'm a nice person. I speak softly. I seem friendly. So now maybe we're ready for as the blow falls. You knew I couldn't sit cross-legged up here and not. And I'll even be more outrageous by telling you that what I'm presenting to you is not a belief system. It's the way things are. see already your shackles are up. But what can I do? Anything less would be dishonest. I just got to play. You've got to know people like me exist. To the extent that I am anything at all, and that we can open for question in a little while, seriously, we could consider me as a separate entity, a set of predisposing characteristics. You could call it would be like a DNA code, except we'll make it psychic instead of physical. I am a set of characteristics, a program that is manifesting by taking a human birth at this time. I have taken a birth into a body, and that body has with it a personality. I've taken a birth into a personality, and that personality is in a body. And I am going through a set of experiences which is called living life. And these experiences have a certain function. These experiences, if used consciously and intentionally by me, are vehicles through which I can awaken to who I am in truth. Let me take you through an example I often use, just another little metaphorical image and an analogy. Imagine, for example, that you have next to your eyes a little control switch, and you look at another human being on channel 1. And what you see when you look at the other human being is a physical body. Man, woman, old, young, fat, thin, pretty, handsome, ugly, interesting. If you're a scientist, you might call them mesomorphs, ectomorphs, and endomorphs. Okay? It's a matrix of individual differences on physical plane. It's the plane of standing on the corner watching all the girls go by. It's that reality. Now let's just say you're looking at another person and you flick your television receiver one channel. Now you look at another person and what you see is their psychology. Oh, you're a manic depressive. Oh, you're a happy person. I wish I was happy like you. People in psychotherapy live on this channel usually. They see everybody in terms of personalities that just happen to be traveling in bodies. They're totally preoccupied with their own depressions, elations, fears, anxieties, loneliness, hopes, etc. And that's reality. That's the real you. And the physical body is merely the carrier of that. Well, let's flip it again. Flip it again and you look at another person, and if you are so trained to be able to see on this channel, you would say, oh, I know who you are. You're a Libra. I can tell because of you're a Sagittarius. On this channel, on channel 3, there's only 12 beings in the universe and various permutations of them. Okay? You are now seeing what could be known as the astral identity of an individual. You're seeing another plane of reality. You're seeing another way of looking at individual differences. These are 3 ways of looking at individual differences, 3 matrices, if you will. But now you flip the dial once more. It starts to get interesting. Now if you flip the dial and look into another person's eyes, you flip the dial inside your own being and look into another person's eyes, what you see is another being looking back at you. Inside an astral configuration, a personality, and a body. You in there? I'm in here. How did you get into that one? And you see what the Christians call soul. You see another soul. You see another being just like you. No different, just like you, just another being. And that you see that all the individual differences are all of the stuff in which this being is encased. Now, you could almost be comfortable with that one, but we unfortunately must flick the dial a few more times. I mean, I must take you the whole journey. You flick the next dial, and what you see when you look into someone else's eyes is you see yourself looking at yourself, looking at yourself. Because on that plane, there is only one of it. It is one awareness that is in a multiplicity of forms. And finally, if you will allow me to flick the dial just once more, if you haven't given up completely yet, you flip the dial once more, and you disappear, and I disappear, and the dial disappears, and we're dealing with what the Buddhists call void, or in the New Testament, before the word. That is, before the vibratory uniqueness, or why God is not able to be spelled in the Hebrew religion. It's unspeakable, unknowable, unseeable, unconceivable, inconceivable. Okay, now, of all of these channels on the television set, who are you? Which one do you want to settle for? You want to be middle-aged? How about that one? I mean, I'm middle-aged. I guess I'm middle-aged. I have a 47-year-old body. It's like I have also a 1974 Dodge van. But you say to me, who are you? And I don't say I'm a Dodge van. Why do I choose to identify with this? Well, if I don't pick body, should I pick personality? I'm somebody on the path. That's a good one to be. I'm a curious person. I'm curious about the future. That's a good one. I'm a responsible person. Well, I'm kind of wild. I'm lazy. I'm working on myself. These are all different psychological takes of who one is. Each plane, each turn of the dial has a different statement of your identity, and each one is getting into a more and more profound place. Now when we come back to who am I, which channel are you talking about? If we start from the top and go on down into the grosser and grosser planes, I am the void who manifests as the one, who becomes the many, who has a unique set of factors to work out through a unique astral, psychological, and physical body. That's what I'm doing on Earth. I have taken a body to do certain work. And when I finish that work, I will drop that body. We are dealing here with the issues of karma and reincarnation. Now, in the West, after the councils of Trent, Constantinople, and Nicaea, anywhere from about 200 to 500 AD, these ideas were roughly thrown out of Christianity because they didn't make the church a workable situation. Because when you had reincarnation and karma, every human being became their own priest. Because it was between you and God. And for the church to keep its own control, it needed to use and see its function as keeping people morally living properly. It had to get rid of those concepts. Have I taken birth before? I have no experiential knowledge of that. But from where I'm sitting, undoubtedly thousands and thousands and thousands of times. Will I take birth again? Undoubtedly thousands and thousands and thousands of times. I have to tax your brain with one more difficult concept. As long as we were dealing with your body, with your personality, with your astral identity, or with your soul, we were dealing in time. Time passes, things change. The minute we got up into the higher plane than that, in the one, there is no time anymore. Time is relative. Now we're dealing with the place where when you know yourself as that, you just are. You are going nowhere and you are coming from nowhere. The Zen master says your going and coming is nowhere but where you are. Now, if you can start to sense, I mean, you don't have to believe what I'm saying just because it's the way the universe looks to me. But if you could empathize just enough to appreciate how it would be to be looking at the world from this point of view. Here's a story that will explain that. I'll give you an example of it. Chinese were coming into Tibet And they were very harsh on the Tibetan monks, who they saw as part of the decadence of Tibet. And they were very cruel to the monks, and they were disemboweling them and shaming them and killing them. And one particularly vicious commander of the army came into a village, and he said, bring all the monks before me. And they said, they've all fled to the hills except one monk in one monastery. And the general was pleased that they'd all fled, because he knew that then his power was known. And he couldn't understand why this one monk hadn't fled. And so he went to see the monk, and the monk was standing in the middle of the courtyard of the monastery. And the army commander walked up to him and he said, "Why didn't you flee? Don't you know who I am? I could take my sword and I could cut through you without blinking an eye." And the monk looked him in the eye and said, "Don't you know who I am? I am somebody who could be cut through by your sword without blinking an eye." And at that point, the commander bowed and left. Could you imagine what space that monk is in? Could you imagine what it's like to see your life as so functional to your awakening, and your death equally so, that the whole business becomes merely a process of growth and awakening and opening and deepening and clearing and shifting channels, and there is no problem about transition. There's no holding on out of fear. It's just opening. Ramana Maharshi, the great Indian saint, was dying of cancer, and he had great miraculous powers, and his devotees said to him, "Bhagwan, Ramana Maharshi, heal yourself." And he says, "No, this body's used up." And they said, "Don't leave us, don't leave us." And they started to cry. And he said to them, "Don't be silly. Where could I go?" That's like me saying, "I'm selling my Dodge van," and you saying, "Don't leave, don't leave." I'm not leaving, I'm just selling my Dodge van. Could you imagine conceiving of death from that point of view? I have a project going, working with terminally ill people, and it's not... I take exception to Dr. Comfort's, some of his criticisms this morning of hospice and of Elizabeth Ross and so on. But it isn't their work. Their work, which I think is extremely admirable, which is an attempt to make dying more psychologically humane, to take it out of the clutches of the medical profession, which treats each death as a failure, and which puts you in a hospital which is a temple to life, in which the only way to deal with death is denial. And I've had to sit through many horrendous moments in hospitals, sitting with somebody who's dying, where the doctors come in with a cheerful, "You're looking better," and then walk out in the corridor and say, "Won't live the night." And the person is surrounded by doctors, nurses, relatives, all of whom are so frightened of death, ministers, rabbis, so frightened of death that there is a surrounding hysterical denial of the process, leaving the person at the moment when they need most to be able to share what's happening to them, a total void of that kind of compassion. And I'm sure most of you have seen those situations, and many of us have participated in, not knowing quite what else to do. And the hospice movement has done an incredible amount to change the image of dying. They are doing for dying what home deliveries and so on, and bringing the husbands into the hospital during the deliveries, is doing for birth. It's bringing it out of the closet. Suddenly we're getting over our Victorian uptightness. It's now suddenly true that human beings do not only eat, but they go to the toilet. Bet you never knew that. And they are born and they die. In India, it's very far out because it's all right out front. When somebody dies, they wrap him in a sheet, and sometimes in a little village they'll put him in a rickshaw to take him to the burning guard. And there's a dead being sitting in a rickshaw on the way to the burning guard. And everybody salutes as he goes by, or she goes by, on the way to the burning guard. And there's no, which we have, which is the minute the person dies, they disappear into the big void beyond. The sheet goes over, and the whole thing is covered, and denial starts immediately. So hospice is doing a great deal just by training people to be compassionate listeners and psychologically able to hang out with people who are dying without freaking. My own work is a little further out than that. My work is for people who say, I would like to use my death as a vehicle for awakening. I would actually like to use the process of dying as a vehicle for awakening, since I have an understanding of the kinds of things you've been talking about. Now, you've got to understand that that tradition of using death in that way is understood by more people in the world today than there are who don't understand that. I mean, we're talking about China, we're talking about India, we're talking about Japan, we're talking about all of the Eastern countries, which population are many. So for such a person, one sits down and one is first very straight. There's no hiding, there's no deception of anything. Your own fear, out in the open. We share it, very straight. But in addition, we are working on ourselves to create a space, an environment, in which a person can experience the deeper parts of their beings. And when they get to one level of it, where time isn't, then there's no more death. Sometimes I just go and I sit in a room with somebody who's dying, and I merely sit there quietly with them. And they run all of their fear through me. And what comes back is peace. Because I don't have any fear of death that I can touch at the moment. To me, death is a process of just leaving what you thought you were. Not what you are, but what you thought you were. They run their fear through, and what comes back is peace, and they release a little bit. And then they run more fear through, and they get back peace. And they run more fear through, and they get back peace. Until you can just feel them. They're just like a flower, opening and extending and opening out. Until again and again you're sitting with somebody who is in incredible pain and suffering, and they're saying, oh, it's so beautiful. I'm feeling such peace. And at the same moment, the ravages of cancer or extreme heart conditions or whatever, Hodgkin's disease. I was working with a boy who just died 2 weeks ago. And I would come in each time, and he would be agitated and irritated, and he had bed sores, and there was a lot of pain and suffering, and I'd wash him and help change him and just be with him. But at the same moment, I was just being quiet inside my own being. In other words, I wasn't coming on to him. I wasn't saying you ought to go deeper in yourself. I wasn't hustling him. I was merely working on myself in his presence. And the result of that was that very slowly he started to let go of identifying with the body, identifying with the pain, the psychological part, and started to experience just a spaciousness in which he could see death. Death comes, birth comes, life comes, growth comes. For you to be of any use to someone that is dying, for me to be of any use, there is one simple rule. You work on yourself. You don't work on the other person. We have a model that is so deeply ingrained in us often as professionals. You're healing someone else. You're doing for the old people. You're doing for the young people. You're doing for the dying people. I have a very simple rule in my life: work on myself. Because all I can offer to you or to a dying person or to a marital problem or to some child, I can only offer my being, and my being is the result of everything I've done in my life to get to where I am. That's all I have to offer. I have my love to offer. But if you can flip through those channels, that love is not conditional love. It's not based on individual differences. It's merely the love because you are seeing the divine plan made manifest again. Every moment of your life, once you understand the purpose of it, is your vehicle for awakening. This moment is your vehicle for awakening. If you're uncomfortable at this moment, okay, you're uncomfortable. Allow it. If you're fascinated, fascinated. Be fascinated. Allow it. Give it space. Give it space. Imagine a picture. And the picture is a picture of a cloud. And if the cloud fills the whole picture frame, all you see is the cloud. And you're totally immersed in the cloud. But allow a little teeny bit of blue sky around the edge of the cloud. And then imagine identifying with the blue sky instead of the cloud. From that point, you can say, cloud. The difference between I'm depressed or I'm depressed versus, wow, am I depressed? Or, I'm depressed versus, look at that depression. Whew. Boy, I don't think I'll ever get through that one. Wow, that's a heavy one. Boy, that's the worst depression I've ever seen. I don't think people live through those kind. Now, the second kind I'm doing is showing the ability to keep a sense of humor in the middle of the depression. Well, if you've got a sense of humor, how depressed could you be? See? But that's the issue. It's the issue of the tiny bit of spaciousness that surrounds the identity with the happenings of life, the experiences of life. It is said in the spirit mystic literature, one to me is loss and gain. One to me is fame and shame. One to me is pleasure and pain. Meaning, there's fame. Hello, Ram Das. That's fame. Ram who? Das, did you say? Don Das, yes. Right. Oh, you're that horrible guy that was, that's shame. Oh, you just won the lottery? That's gain. Wallet just stolen? Loss. Oh. Pleasure. Oh, my darling, come here. Oh, my leg hurts. In each one, they take you completely, get lost in it. I'm somebody who has a hurt leg. Versus, here I am, and there's a leg that hurts. The predicament is that most of us don't want this kind of consciousness because we don't want to lose the rushes or the trips of life. We don't want to forego the romanticism. We don't want to forego the rush that comes from identifying with our own melodrama. And that kind of equanimity, that kind of quietness, that kind of spaciousness, that kind of presence, that kind of compassion for oneself and for all things, because from a quiet, clear place you see how it all is without pushing or pulling. For it is only the non-attached mind that can truly appreciate how it is. Otherwise, you're just seeing the projections of your own desires. If you're hungry and you get down the street, you will notice restaurants. If your car is making a strange knock, you will notice gas stations. If you are horny, you will notice makeable people. And that is what your universe is full of. Because you and I are living in entirely different universes, because each individual is living in a universe created of selecting from the possible infinity of things, those things which lock in with your own desire system. So if you identify with a desire, that will determine what you see in the world. When you get to the point that you can allow a desire system without identifying with it, sure, I have lust. Sure, I have greed. Sure, I have fear. Sure, I have depression. But here I am. I am, and there's an aging body, and I am, and there's depression. And I am, and there's hope, and I am, and there's planning, and I am, and there's death. How different the space. That's because the television channels, you're living on more than one of them simultaneously. You're starting to live on all of them, all at once. There are some very heavy processes that occur at the time of death. And the Tibetan Buddhists, for example, understood that the meaning of life was the preparation for death. You were preparing to stay conscious through these incredibly heavy processes that happen. Heavy process, example. A fellow called me the other day. His mother just died. He's a meditator. He's a Buddhist. Meditative person. He sat with her through the process. He said at first she protested, then she acquiesced. He said then it got to the point where she was too weak to eat, so I had to feed her. And he said that we made fun of that. We thought, well, I used to be the child, you used to feed me, now you're the child and I'm feeding you. And that was kind of fun and playful. Then it got to the point where she lost her sphincter control and her bowel control, and I found myself carrying her to the toilet with her feces dripping down my leg. And that was a hard one for us. And then it got to the point where all of her unconscious processes started to rise to the surface, and I found in the middle of the night sometimes she would be calling to me, and I'd go over and she'd start to make love to me. And all of the Oedipal stuff was coming up. And he said, and through it all, we still kept the thread. We still kept the thread of consciousness with one another. It's not the physical death that's so scary, it's the psychological death. It's the ceasing to be who you think you are. The thread was held. And I have been now with many people and just holding them as they die. And being right with them, looking in their eyes as the spirit just leaves, as they just leave. And the last breath occurs and the eyes glaze over and the being just leaves. And there's just a release, an opening. Because by the time they got to that moment, they were no longer clinging to that which dies. Don't be silly. Where could I go? There's no more clinging to that which died. For who we are was, is, and will be. And these are just processes of transformation that we're going through. Just like it's very hard for a prepubescent to understand the time will come when his baseball cards aren't that relevant. So the time will come when even our mortal coil isn't that relevant. I gave a scenario at the last workshop, and I like it because it's so explicit. It's a very heavy, far out one, but I'll give it to you anyway. If you will just imagine somebody who has died, and they died in the Western, I'll give you two people. One has died in the Western metaphor, see, so they're busy not dying. Doctor, save me, transplant me, implant me, do whatever you do, but don't let me die. But you're dead, then you die. And a voice says to you, hello. And you say, well, if I can hear a voice saying hello, I guess I didn't die. The voice says, no, you died. You say, well, I can't have died. And that's confusion. It's called purgatory in Christianity. And you just sort of hang in that place, and then you get reprogrammed into the next round. But now, as you go through incarnation after incarnation, on and on and on and on, somewhere along in the sequence of these, you begin to awaken just a little bit. And you get to the point where you begin to hear what I'm talking about, and you begin to see, wow, far out, that's all that happens when you die. So as you're dying this time, instead of, doctor, you say, wow, this is going to be great. Here we go. Ready? Put on your safety belt. Here I go. Ready or not? Oh, wow. Whew. Now you're dead, see. Somebody says hello, and you say hi. Now you're in a new predicament. You're still somebody. You're not nobody yet. You haven't finished your rounds of birth and death. So you're going to take another incarnation because you've got more stuff to do. You've got to go through more experiences. So you have a list of things you've got to go through, see. You say, gee, if I did it right, I could clean up all of these in one birth. Far out. Let's see. If I took birth as a child in the poorest tribe in Africa, that would be good, because I'd clean up that one. That was the one I got from being that king 50 births ago when I misused that. Then let's see, if I'll get raped when I'm 9. That'll be beautiful. That would take care of that one, see. And then, I'll get syphilis at 13. I could die at 17 and clean the whole thing up. Far out. Okay. So now you've got a problem. You're all ready to do this. You've got your plan, and you put a little sign on you saying, this is all just a scenario. This isn't reality. You put a sign on it, and the sign says, I am somebody who wants to take this birth looking for two other people who need me, karmically like I need them, And the computers whir and all kinds of things happen, and within 1 million or 2 Earth years, something comes up. Doesn't matter, it's going on anyway. And these two people say, let's have a baby, or there's a moment of passion, and there you are. And as you're being born, you say to everybody, well, see you later. And you dive into Earth, and you go, wah, wah, and you're a baby. Veil over. You are a baby, that's all your reality is, a baby. 9 years old, you're raped. 13, syphilis. 17, you die. I don't want to die. You're dead. You get them up and you say, everybody says, hi, back so soon. Right, well, that cleaned up all those 5 now. Is that too gross for you? From where I'm sitting, I've got to up-level it just one bit by just saying to you that since the reality that lies behind all these relative realities, there is no time, all your reincarnations are happening simultaneously. I mean, that's a little heavy for you, but you got to understand that it's not like it's spread out like Bridie Murphy, like you with that 40 years ago. It's all here now, all your incarnations. So that when you get all done with the last one, you realize nothing happened anyway. I mean, I'm pushing your mind all over the place. If you could see the universe that way, what would be the difference in the meaning of death? Well, I'm finishing chapter 3. Now, I'm not saying that you should have a mind intellectual overlay that makes everything different that way, not a dishonest imposition of intellect. But for anybody that will subject themselves to simply sitting down quietly and learning how to quiet their mind by allowing the thoughts to come and go, just as simple a thing as following your breath. Just take 2 minutes now. Bring your awareness to your breath. Just notice the breath. Either notice it going in and out of your nose, or notice it rising and falling in the middle of your abdomen. Pick one or the other and stay with it. Notice the breath going in. Notice the breath going out. And notice the little transition points between the in-breath and the out-breath, and the out-breath and the in-breath. Keep your awareness focused on your breath. Let the rest of the thoughts come and go, just like tiny little insects around a light. If you notice feelings in your body, notice them, and then let them go. If you are thinking about what this is all about, notice that thought, let it go. Come back to your breath. Breathing in, breathing out. The thought: we are sitting in a school auditorium in Orange County at a conference, a set of thoughts. Notice them, let them go. Floating by like leaves on a stream. Thinking about the future, remembering the past. Thoughts coming, going. Bring your awareness back to your breath. Deeper, quieter. Follow the breath carefully. Follow the in-breath, the moment of turning, the out-breath, the moment of turning. The silence in the room, notice it, let it go. Come back to the breath. The breath is the focal point. It's the primary object. The rest of the universe comes and it goes. Problems come into mind. Notice them. Bring your awareness back to your breath. Staying right in this place now. Don't move yet. That is the first method that you use in order to begin to be aware of who you are. You can do it anywhere, anytime. You don't need beads, you don't need priests, you don't need ashrams, you just need your breath. Because while you are following your breath, which is the doorway between form and formless, because between the in-breath and the out-breath, and the out-breath and the in-breath, there is the space. Now let me give you one more exercise. Just find the whole other quality. Focus in the middle of your chest. Just as if you had two nostrils. And breathe. Now as if you were breathing in and out of the middle of your chest. Let your nose or your mouth breathe in or out the oxygen. But imagine that your chest is simultaneously breathing in a very soft, very delicate mist. Breathe in, breathe out. When you breathe in, let that mist pour through your body. Let it pour up into your head, to your arms, to your torso, to your legs. And when you breathe out now, breathe out all of the heaviness, all of the tightness, all of the guardedness, all of the disappointment, all of the pain, the loneliness. And then once again, fill in the in-breath with this very, very soft mist. Let it wash through you just as if it were Drano, cleaning through all the tubes. When it dislodges something, a sadness or a doubt or a fear, just breathe it out. Breathe deeply. And then once you feel you have loosened as much of the stuff that holds you back from knowing who you are as you can at this moment, then become like a director of energy and take in this very fine mist, fill your being with it, and then breathe it out and send it towards those beings with your thoughts. Send it towards those beings who suffer. Whether their suffering be physical, psychological, or spiritual. Just as if you were surrounding them with light. You were surrounding them with a loving space that said, do what you must do, but know that I am here with you. Use the power of your own thought and the openness of your heart to give life and love and space to all beings. And you can get so that every in-breath is a blessing you receive. Every out-breath is a blessing you transmit. With those two exercises, following your breath to quiet your mind, and breathing in and out of the heart to deepen your receiving of love and your compassion outward, you become an environment in which everybody you meet can grow. You become an environment of quietness, of non-judgment, of love, of presence. For you to share the higher channels of consciousness, you must know them in your own being. Not with your intellect, but with your being. When Gandhi was on a train that was leaving the station, a reporter rushed up to him and said, Mahatmaji, would you give me a message to take back to my people? And Gandhi said, he scribbled on a piece of paper, "My life is my message." To die consciously, you must live consciously. To live consciously, you must have the courage to go inside yourself to find out who you really are. To understand that behind all of the masks of individual differences, you are a being of beauty, of love, of awareness. When Christ said the kingdom of heaven was within, he wasn't just putting you on. When Buddha said each person is the Buddha, he was saying the same thing. Until you can allow your own beauty, your own dignity, your own being, you cannot free another. So if I were giving people one instruction, I would say work on yourself. Have compassion for yourself. Allow yourself to be beautiful. And all the rest will follow. If there are any pressing questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Yes?
A question is asked about the existence of beings on other planets in our universe.
Well, I think that there are many planes of reality, and there are many beings that exist on planes other than the physical plane of reality. I think you're asking a question about the physical plane, about the physical universe, beings on other planets. I know nothing about any of that. I do know that there are beings living on other planes of consciousness and that this is merely another plane. So that you could look at planet Earth or the physical plane, not Earth, the physical plane, as a certain kind of training ground for people who have certain kinds of work to do. Buddha talked about them as being beings that had one of the 5 hindrances. That those were the people that took birth on the physical plane because they needed the kind of grossness of the sandpaper of the experiences of the physical plane to do the certain kind of purification. And he said that the 5 hindrances were lust and greed was one of them. That's just one. Hatred and ill will, agitation, sloth and torpor, which means inertia, and doubt. And that if you didn't have one of those 5, you didn't take birth on this plane, you took birth on another plane. So that's who we are to begin with, which makes us rather a colorful lot. And so in that sense, there is that this is the earth, and there are other planes that are what are called the heavenly planes. There are all these lokas or planes. In almost every tradition you find these things. And they are all equally as much the projections of desire systems, just subtler and subtler ones all the time. And so beings take birth here and then take birth on other planes. But in answer to your question, I think about the physical universe. I don't know. I don't know. The question was, would I have been open to the Eastern mystical tradition had I not had such extensive experience with psychedelic chemicals? The answer is that I probably would not have. However, somebody who is now young in this culture now would be able to. In other words, at that time I wouldn't have. Now I might. If I wasn't so encrusted and closed in by the time I'm 47 and have bought a model so tightly that I don't have any space, then I wouldn't be able to hear it now. But now the environment is supportive of hearing this message. while 15 years ago it was not. I think that the psychoanalysis was useful. I'm sure everything in my life has been useful. I mean, I look back on all my experiences now, ones that when I was in the middle of them I thought, oh, nobody's been cursed like I've been cursed. And then I look back now and say, wow, so that's what that was about. Well, far out. Look at what I learned from that. Isn't that interesting? Right? I tend to think of psychotherapy now as sort of like body and fender repair work. It isn't the essence of my being, but it's good to keep you got to honor the whole organism and the personality and the body as well. My diets, all of that stuff is ways of honoring the container I'm in, if you will, which includes my personality. But what happens is that as you start to break the identification to the grosser planes and start to identify with higher and higher awareness in yourself, you find that the individual differences that before were a problem for you are no longer a problem. They are merely a definition of your uniqueness. So that I would say that my neuroses didn't go away. I've just made them my friends. Okay? They're just kind of irrelevant. They're irrelevant friends to have around. Okay? I'm just as neurotic as I ever was. Right? Yes?
This is a question about the relationship between creativity and mental health.
Well, I didn't hear Dr. May yesterday, but I do feel that the Western model of creativity is based on neurosis, and that there is a whole other way to understand the creative act, which means, for example, Bach was amazingly non-neurotic, and he certainly was a prolifically creative being, and so have been many creative beings, with very little anxiety. And I understand creativity the way I understand it is, just as Einstein said, I did not arrive at my understanding of the basic laws of the universe through my rational mind. Rather, he went inward into a higher way of knowing, an intuitive space, another plane of consciousness in which the universe is. Outside of time, it just all is. And then as he comes back from that, what's called a mystical experience, he comes back in, and then his training as a physicist leads him to take that non-conceptual thing and conceive of it into physics. And so Bach goes into these spaces and comes back, and he hears the whole symphony. It's all there, just like that. And then he just comes back and writes it out. So that my feeling is much less that we are learning versus we are remembering. My feeling is much less that we create rather than we tune to. As far as I'm concerned, the entire universe is within us. We merely have to quiet down enough to hear who we are. And as you become more conscious and less mechanical in the sense of being identified with the things which are within law, like body and personality, which are within deterministic law, as you move into pure awareness, you are freer in that sense, and out of you, every act becomes a creative amalgam of all of the things in the universe. That's what Taoism is about. That's when you see a monk, you can see the way he walks is a creative act. The way he washes a dish is a creative act. His calligraphy is the creative act. You can see, just in the form of the movement of the hand, the creative act. It isn't now I'll be creative. It's just a creative way of living. It's a way that's in flow with things around you. And that's what that breathing is about. It's about opening you up until you just become part of the force or the flow of the universe. And there's where creativity is from where I'm sitting. Okay.
This is a question about how chakras work.
The chakras, or psychic energy foci in the body, of which there are 7 in the body and there are some over the head, are a way of conceiving of the process of transformation of consciousness via the route of focusing on energy. Okay? Working with the kundalini or the shakti or the energy or the prana or whatever you want to call it. That's one route of doing it. Like if you're climbing a mountain, you could take the southern route or the northern route or the eastern route or the western route. One route will be meditation. You could just sit down and follow your breath, and in the course of that, all your chakras will open and all the energy will flow and it'll all happen. And all you did was follow your breath. Or you could do breathing exercises and bring the energy up your spine, the sushumna. Another method, the south route. Or you could do service. My route is service, of love and service. I mean, my daily life is my vehicle of coming to God. You are my exercise on myself. That's my vehicle. And I am yours. So that's karma yoga, okay? So it's just another route through, and it is a way. It's a very beautiful way, but it's only another way. Thank you.